there's kind of this false idea that Christians, you don't need to get involved in politics. You don't need to be involved in government. Jesus is the king. He'll take care of everything. We can just stay in our lane. And we kind of give ground to the other side, and out of this sense of it's the Christian thing to do, to turn the other cheek or to let someone else fight the fight, but that's not their call. But I think that we're seeing that if you do that, we're going to lose a lot of the freedoms we have. We're going to lose the ground that we have, and kids are going to grow up in a very different world than they even are now if we don't kind of do something collectively.
Hey, so fantastic to be able to join you today on our podcast. And I have as our special guest, Nathan Shackleford. Nathan, thank you for being here today. Nathan is with First Liberty, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that. But Nathan, I'm really glad that you're here today. Thank you. You most recently spoke to our Legacy Givers team and at the Dallas Country Club. We really enjoyed that. And it just made me think after you got through, it'd be a great moment to invite you in and really dig a little deeper into religious freedom, religious liberty, and just talk about what you guys are doing and what the state of affairs are in our country. So Thank you for being with us.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I always get started the very same way, is just where and how you grew up and just kind of how your early years impacted where you are today.
Yeah.
Kind of give us a little bio.
Yeah, I grew up in a very strong Christian family. So my dad's the founder of First Liberty. So I grew up in a very strong faith-filled family, oldest of three. So I have two siblings, 3 years and 6 years younger, and grew up in kind of the Allen area, North Dallas. Went to a small private Christian school from middle to high school, and went from there to Texas A&M. And
you're an Aggie.
I am.
Well, you've been watching the Olympics. We were filming this during the time. Just the Olympics just got over, the Summer Olympics.
Yes.
And there are quite a few Aggies on the Olympic team. Yeah.
We have some athletes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's where I met my wife, actually. So.
Oh, great.
Some fond memories there.
Yeah, fantastic. You got your Aggie ring on today?
I do.
There you go.
I always have it on.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I went from there, got married, came back to the Dallas area, and went to SMU for law school.
Yeah.
And then I've been with First Liberty now for about 5 years. But my dad's founded First Liberty, so I've kind of been around it all my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, fantastic. And so you're now on staff at First Liberty, part of their team.
Yes.
What are you majoring in there? What are you doing?
Yeah, so I kind of wear a couple different hats.
Yeah.
So I work on the legal side, doing our in-house associate general counsel work, so contracts, agreements, those types of things. And then I am on the ministry relations team, where I do a little bit of speaking, interacting with supporters, and then now heading up this initiative called F3, Future of Faith and Freedom, which is trying to educate, equip, and empower those in their 20s to 40s to come up and be the next generation, to stand for religious freedom and kind of bring that to their communities. So
seems to be a lot of interest in that age group about government and about freedoms and about constitutional law and things. When I was that age, we never thought about or really, knew much about. But it seems that the next generation, the 20 to 40-year-olds, those guys have done a lot of work. They're quite, some of them are quite informed about things.
Yeah, I think what we've seen is, as there's been a restriction on rights, there's a quote that Justice Roberts has where he says, "You can't stand up for your rights if you don't know what they are."
Yeah.
And I think people are realizing, I don't really know what my rights are. Can I do this? Can I not do this? Where's the line? And so in a culture where your rights can come under attack, more people want to know, where is that line? How far can I go? Especially in some areas that the state isn't as friendly, like California or New York, and they want to know, what are my rights here? What can I do as a person of faith? As a business owner, can I do a Bible study before work? Can I have scripture in our founding documents of our company without having legal repercussions from that? So I think in this culture, people are just wanting to see that, but they're also seeing their kids going to schools, and we're seeing what's happening with these story hours that we're seeing, these books that are being pushed, these agendas that are being pushed, and people are saying, as a person of faith, I don't want my kids in that. what are my rights to keep my kids out of that type of a situation?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as those 20s to 40s are having kids growing in their businesses, they're starting to get hit with that for the first time and really wanting to know, what can I do to stand up against that?
Yeah. So they're activating because they want to protect their children.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that seems to be going on more and more and more, right?
Yeah.
But it looks like, though, we're a little bit behind the 8 ball on that. We're a little late to the show. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say that a lot of times there's kind of this false idea that Christians, you don't need to get involved in politics. You don't need to be involved in government. Jesus is the king. He'll take care of everything. We can just stay in our lane. And we kind of give ground to the other side, and out of this sense of it's the Christian thing to do, to turn the other cheek, or to let someone else fight the fight, but that's not their call. But I think that we're seeing that if you do that, we're going to lose a lot of the freedoms we have. We're going to lose the ground that we have, and your kids are going to grow up in a very different world than they even are now if we don't kind of do something collectively.
Yeah. Well, help us understand then really where we are with religious freedom. Help us understand, what does that mean? How are our freedoms protected? How do we lose those freedoms? Tell me a little bit of help, because a lot of the people that are listening now are like Justice Roberts said. I mean, it's hard to stand up for your freedoms if you really don't know what those freedoms are and how you got them and what's the basis of them. Can you give us a little tutorial in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the great thing about the U.S. that makes us different than every other nation, every other country, is our Constitution stays intact. It doesn't get changed every 10 years. It's not something that gets overthrown when someone gets into power. And so the rights set out there are very strong, and they give us a lot of protection. And the First Amendment that's there is the right for religious expression, not to have government interference, and not to have a Church of England. So we're looking at the founders that didn't want a Church of England, and they didn't want to be told what denominational sect they had to be a part of, how they could worship, what that would look like. And so that's what our founders wanted. And so that document really reflects that. So if our justice system upholds the laws as written, we should have the greatest religious freedoms in the entire world, which we do still to this day. But what we see is when people want to change the Constitution, they want to try to get rid of that. They want to soften it. That's when we face issues. And so in the judicial system, where you see that is when judges, you have two types of judges. You have liberal judges and conservative judges. Mm-hmm. Not in the sense of Republican, Democrat, but the best example is this example of there's a sign in a park that says no skateboards in the park. The conservative justice is going to want to conserve the laws that's written. So it's going to say no skateboards in the park. That's all that this law intended to do, no skateboards. The liberal justice is going to say, well, at this point, we weren't considering motor scooters. We weren't considering bicycles. These things are similar. We should include these. Mm-hmm. So now you expand the law to something it wasn't necessarily intended to do. You've now become a lawmaking authority when it's intended for that to go through Congress, the legislative branch. And so we've seen a lot of cases that have done this. Roe versus Wade is a perfect example of that, where the judges said, well, this should be in law. It's not, so we're going to put it into law. We've seen the same thing in a couple of different decisions. One really small, good example of that is in the Civil Rights Act. Every person of faith in the workplace, if you work in a business that has 15 or more employees, you have the right to ask for religious accommodation, and that religious accommodation has to be granted as long as it's not a substantial burden on the employer. So you hear that and you go, okay, that's really good protection for people of faith in the workplace. Well, about 50 years ago, we had a case that said, hey, what substantial burden really means is slight inconvenience. De minimis is the term, the legal term. So now we completely rewrote the law to say substantial burden to slight inconvenience. So now if you're at your workplace and God's told you can't work on the Sabbath, if that's a slight inconvenience to your employer, they could fire you and say, we don't have to accept your accommodation. Mm-hmm. Well, we just had a case about 2 years ago for a post office worker named Gerald Groff, who believed in the Sabbath and said, hey, I need an accommodation not to work on Sundays so I can observe the Sabbath. And the other side, the argument was, well, this is an inconvenience to the employer. So we went to the Supreme Court and said, hey, this is wrong. We need to go back to substantial burden. Court agreed 9-3, went back to what the law said. And now it's going to be on the post office to show that a post office worker is willing to work on weekends, overtime, doubles, whatever he needed to do, that somehow that's an inconvenience because he can't work on Sundays to observe the Sabbath. So that's one example. But there are a few cases like that have been really, really damaging to religious freedom. That in the last few years, when we've had a court that will uphold the laws it's written, that we've had a lot of headway, including probably the worst case on religious freedom in the last 100 years called Lemon, that basically tried to put into law separation of church and state, which we don't find in the Constitution anywhere. It's in a private letter from Jefferson saying we want to keep the institutions of the state and the church separate. Not that we want people that are involved in government not being able to have a faith. Kind of try to put that into law.
Let's go back over that and explain that again, because basically the whole idea of a violation of church and state has nothing to do with the Constitution as it was written.
Correct.
It only has something to do with a piece of correspondence that Jefferson sent unofficially or officially. I mean, it has no bearing in the law, right?
Correct. And it gets taken out of context of what he's trying to say there. They take the words and they apply that, but his intent was never that. It was, we don't want we don't want the Church of England. That's what it really came down to is we don't want the government telling our churches what to do.
Right.
That doesn't mean we don't want
the
church
of England was a government. I mean, the Queen is the head.
Correct.
The King is the head of the Church of England. So it was a government established religion.
Correct.
And so our forefathers moved here with the idea that we do not want a government established religion. We have a freedom of religion here. You are free to worship God in your prescribed manner. That doesn't just cover Christians, right? I mean, It covers Muslims, it covers whomever, right?
Correct.
So every time that we strengthen the system, we're not just strengthening it for Christians, but we're also strengthening for the other religions. I remember back when prayer got taken out of public school. I'm old enough to remember that now.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad, who was a teacher, saying, this doesn't sound like a good thing, but it's a good thing because now we don't have to put up with other religions doing their prayer. And I even then, as a young kid, I thought, there's something wrong with that idea. And so could you sort of elaborate on that a little bit? I mean, because what we'll find is like some, we have what I term now, or what you hear now said, is secular religion versus Christianity. But it's a religion nonetheless, secularism. But talk a little bit about that, because I want people to really understand that whole idea of the separation of church and state, how it does not apply, and what it's left us with.
Yeah. I mean, really, that separation of church and state idea, again, is in that letter. But when you had judges that kind of said, hey, we like this idea, we want it in law, they kind of put it into law through that Lemon case about 50 years ago, saying that...
Explain, what are the facts of that Lemon case?
Yeah, the big finding so it was less about the actual, what the case was than the ruling, which is they created this test that said, hey, basically any time that there's that church and state collide, we're going to look at this very strictly. We're going to look at it with a different lens. We're going to put a different test on it because we don't want government and religion ever really intersecting ever. So they were anytime that those two would touch, they would have a different standard for that. And then they also created an exception where a private citizen could sue the government for religious imagery on government land, which you can't do for anything else, but created a loophole. So probably one of the worst decisions that we've had in religious freedom in the past 100 years. But we had a case a few years ago.
That was the Warren Court, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Same court. Yeah. So then we get to... we had a few cases over the past few years that have kind of looked at that Lemon case, and one about not a Ten Commandments, but a cross for fallen soldiers in World War I, Bladensburg, Maryland, where that question was asked of why should this cross come down? And they said, well, it's because of that Lemon case, and we really don't like that, so we're not following it today. So that cross got to stand, and then we got to the Coach Kennedy case that we had a few years ago of the coach that was fired for taking a knee, praying silently after games. And the whole thing there was they're saying, oh, well, this is a government official. This is a public football coach that's having a public display of his religion. That's the that's separation of church and state. That can't happen. Mm-hmm. And so we got back to this case and the judges said, hey, we kind of said we don't like that Lemon decision. And the only reason we're here today, this is a citizen that's happens to be a coach that's engaging in religious expression. And they decided, hey, it's time to get rid of that Lemon case. And so they threw it out and said, we're now going to go back to historicity, which is why did our founders put the First Amendment in? What's the role of religion in the public square, which gives us a lot more religious freedom than we've ever really had.
So it's really simple. I mean, you got conservative judges who want to conserve the rule of law. And basically, so they're willing to go back to the original intent of the versus liberal judges who want to expand the law, even though they're not elected to make law, but
Correct.
Expand it in such a way that it really takes away our right. That, for instance, for the football coach, his right to express his religion, his faith.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And he was even asked at the end of that interview, going back to something you said earlier of, after the case was over, he said, if this was a case for a Muslim that wanted to pray, would you have been for it? And he said, absolutely. He said, I believe in religious equality for all Americans. And so what we have to look at is, even though we may be believers, we have to say, it would be very hypocritical to say, I have the right to believe what I get to believe, but you don't have the same right to believe the same thing.
That's where I was headed.
So as believers, we have to allow that, but then allow that dialogue that can come from that. And for us at First Liberty, if we help, we have a large amount of our cases that are for Jewish clients. Mm-hmm. We also have helped Muslims, Hindus, all types of different people of faith. And if we can show them love through that process, that they're not having a legal bill because of this, that there are people that are paying for their case to happen. Mm-hmm. The question that they have to ask is, who are these people and why are they so different that they're taking this case on, and that I'm not having to pay thousands of dollars to defend this. Mm-hmm. And if we can be an example in that way and start that dialogue, we might be able to have conversations that can lead to those kind of deeper spiritual questions.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, let's kind of move to the next level a little bit. What can churches do when it comes to religious liberty? You know, back in the day when we first started the church, it was a no-no to even talk almost about government from the pulpit. I mean, but particularly about politics. You know, it was said that if you endorsed a politician for any level, you could have your 501c3 revoked and lose your tax-exempt status. And so, I think a lot of pastors and churches took that to heart and really dropped out of the whole God in government thought, and just said, leave politics to politicians.
Yeah.
And we have massive church movements throughout the nation that, have grown massively as churches, planted churches, grown major mega churches. But the states that they live in have gotten worse and worse. They've not allowed the kingdom to invade their states or their country, or what I'm saying. Hey, they've kept this whole idea that we're separate from politics, and so we won't delve into that if you guys will leave us alone.
Yeah,
and so I think there's a little bit of confusion. It's beginning to get clearer, but there's a little bit of confusion of what churches can do. And so can you kind of shed a little light on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think going back to what you're saying about churches, I think a lot of sometimes churches and pastors buy into that separation of church and state idea and almost make that into something that they're supposed to do as Christians is, we're supposed to stay out of government. Oh, that's how our government's set up. We're supposed to stay out of it.
Well, here's the argument today. It's so divisive, we shouldn't get into it. That's the argument today. Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you look at our founding fathers and the first Bibles, some of the first Bibles that were printed in the United States were approved to be printed and paid for by Congress.
Yeah.
So our government body was involved in the printing of Bibles and in putting Bibles in schools, teaching from primers that had scripture. So we are, although there wasn't that church-based religion, they were providing for religious tools for people to use. But going back to what people can and can't do, a lot of times people are scared of losing their 501c3, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that a lot of people don't realize is a church in and of itself is a tax-exempt entity. You don't even really need to get a 501c3 because you're already tax-exempt as a church. But the idea of losing your tax-exempt status, it's only happened once in the history of everything that we've known of a church losing its exempt status, and it was restored shortly after.
Mm-hmm.
And you have churches now that will go very extreme on both directions, talking politics, and nothing will really happen. But what you see a lot is when you have a lot more conservative type churches that will speak up more loudly. That's when those letters from the IRS start coming out, and we've responded to numerous letters from the IRS saying you have no authority to get involved here, and challenge them to if they want to, if there's something they can do to do it, so that we can get to the root of everything. But they don't want that fight. No. So in practicality, I mean, there's really, you can really do a lot until the IRS does something. But if we're saying let's play it how the laws are written, let's play it safe. The safest line is just don't endorse a specific candidate from the pulpit, and don't financially contribute to a candidate through church funds. Besides that, it's pretty open. So if the pastor, the pastoral staff, anyone at the church wants to endorse a candidate in their personal capacity, totally fine. No issue with that. If the church wants to invite the candidates together to have a dialogue about things at the church, that's great. Just if you invite one, invite both. Mm-hmm. You may only have one that wants to show up, but invite both. If you want to say, like a lot of churches do, here's who in our church body or in the church body in the Dallas area is running for school board. Mm-hmm. You're not endorsing that candidate. You're just saying here's who's running. Mm-hmm. And you can also talk about issues that impact elections. So you can talk about issues like abortion and marriage and those types of issues, religious freedom, and talk about how those are biblical issues, and talk about encouraging people to do the research on that. Mm-hmm. You can provide voters' guides to people that are neutral, that say, here's what this one does, here's what another one does. Mm-hmm. On our website, we have some tools that even go through the religious rights that each candidate, for example, what they've done on certain religious freedom issues. Mm-hmm. And so education, informing people, and letting people make their own decision without having an official endorsement from the church is really the safest. But
you're saying, but you can make official endorsement. I have friends that are doing it.
Yes.
I mean, they are very clear.
Oh yeah.
And have dear friends, some in California, who have early on they came out very strong for a particular candidate.
Yeah.
And their churches exploded, grew. I mean, just amazing. Yeah. Because, people say, well, gosh, somebody's finally willing to take a stand.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in all this because I still don't think we know exactly where it's all headed in terms of the consequences for the kingdom. Yeah. Maybe the church, some of these churches have done very well by doing that. Yeah. Others, I'm not sure. I'm sure there's disappointment story too. We have chosen to take a little bit of a different bend, in the sense that we want people to be free to make up their own mind.
Yeah.
But I guess one of the things I want to encourage us and all churches to do is let's be a little more engaged in government. There's not a whole lot I don't think we can do to impact the presidential election. I mean, we can all vote, but where we can really change the world is on a school board. Mm-hmm. Where we have a chance a park board, city councilman, mayor, because that's where For instance, it's now legal to teach Bible in public schools. I think I'm right about that. And so, but it's up to each individual district as to whether they'll do it or not. And so, if we had a school board in the district of Christians, then we'd be able to take advantage of that. If we don't, which we don't, we won't.
Yeah.
And so, what are your thoughts on all that? I mean, I don't know. Maybe you're.
Yeah.
I think we have to have some place to actually get involved in government.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, like you were saying, Texas recently passed a bill that a lot of people don't know about too, which is that in the state of Texas, you can have chaplains in every school.
Oh.
And again, that has to be approved by the school district though. So if we're not involved in these things, we can't vote on these things. We can't kind of have a presence there. So being involved locally is the ability to possibly have a say in the curriculum that's coming out if you're at the school board level. To talk about, we've had issues where different city council officials have had brought things against people that if the board was different, we wouldn't have had that case come up. So getting involved locally is definitely important, and just educating people on the issues on what they can do. And I think what you're saying, like, how can we make a difference? You look at the amount of evangelical Christians that vote, it's very low.
Yeah.
And that even registered to vote is low.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
I think it's that idea that it's a dirty type of thing to get involved in, that, Christians, we're not supposed to get involved with this.
We're supposed to love people.
We're going to let it sort it out.
Yeah.
We're going to, Jesus, the ultimate cop-out is Jesus is king. He'll determine the way the outcomes come out.
Yeah.
But we still have a role to play. Jesus doesn't just tell us to have faith and then just sit in the back seat and watch everything unfold. We have an active role to play.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that people are engaged, that they vote, that they use the rights that we have in this country that a lot of people don't have because of God's favor that we've seen on the country of giving us this type of government, and kind of being a beacon for the rest of the world on faith. And if we stop exercising those rights, we're gonna lose that beacon and the ability to touch the rest of the world.
Well, the pulpit is a powerful instrument, and my sense is that many more churches today are looking at how to get engaged, what to do, what are the steps, what can I do, what should I do, and what are those steps to doing it. And I think, that's where First Liberty is, where when we talk about recovering the faith of America, that's got to be a huge first or second step, is what's the process? What do we do? How can we do this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a lot of different resources on our website that talk about different things that are going on. So we have resources for people that might be in the workplace that want to know what their rights are, or people that are in their churches that want to know what's the line. There are people that cross the line and then will endorse people and do all that with no repercussions. But all we'll do is point out to people what is the line in the law that the law prescribes of how far you can go without any fear of reprisal. But we have tools like that on First Liberty's website, firstliberty.org. Under our resources, we have a lot of different things that will tell people where that line is in each space, from education, military, wherever that looks like. But just knowing where those lines are can help people to be a little bit more bold.
Yeah.
Knowing that they have the right to engage in a way that they didn't know they could engage in.
Speaking of just engaging and voting, etc., we have a major election coming up in November, and I wanted just to get your thoughts and your comments a little bit about, the Harris Walz ticket and the Trump and Vance ticket, and where are they in terms of friendliness towards religious freedom? Can you talk a little bit? Let's start with just the candidates in general.
Yeah.
Help us a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. We've the good thing is here we actually have examples on both sides because both have been in power at some point. Under Trump, we saw a different way of putting in judges, of really looking at the record of the judges and who was going to be those conservative justices. So under the Trump administration, there was a lot of really good judges that were put into place, which a lot of times we'll tell people, religious freedom might be important enough to be an issue that you might, if nothing else, look at religious freedom. What are they going to do for religious freedom? What are they going to do for judges? And under Trump, we saw that he put really good judges in place that are going to uphold the law, which is going to give you the most religious freedom possible. A lot of really good presidential acts, executive orders that were put in to protect people of faith under the Trump administration. And there's no reason to think that that's not how that would go moving forward.
Yeah.
And then we've seen under the Biden-Harris administration a lot more attacks on that to promote. Because if you're going to promote DEI, LGBTQ issues, you have to take away religious expression to do that, because that's the vocal opposition to that of, hey, that's not what God calls us to.
Yeah.
And if you want that agenda pushed, you want those voices quieted that says, hey, this isn't biblical. Hey, we can't do this. This goes against what God tells us to do. We have to silence those voices to push that narrative. And I think we've seen that a lot with different bills that have been floated out to be put in that were struck down, and different disappointments that Roe v. Wade was overturned by that administration very vocally. I think you see it there, and then I think you see on the judges' side that Biden and Kamala are very, very pro. They're very open to the idea of court packing. And are pushing this narrative now of court reform, which is very, very dangerous, not just from a religious freedom perspective, but from just our rights in general as a society perspective.
I want to talk about that because I don't think people really know what that means.
Yeah.
Court packing, court reform. So I'd like to, first of all, know what that means. Secondly, how can they do it? I thought we were protected constitutionally in that area. And then thirdly, what would be the consequences of that? Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. So a couple different terms to unpack. The first one is court packing. When we're talking about court packing, we're talking about the idea of adding more justice to the court so that if you don't have a majority, that you can have you can add more justices in to essentially get the majority outcome you want. Venezuela is a perfect example of this.
So wait, hang on just a minute. So you would come in as a new administration and you'd immediately look at the Supreme Court and say, okay, we're a liberal administration. We have a conservative justices. We're going to add 4 new justices here to turn the table.
Correct.
Right? So they'd create some kind of process where they could do that quickly and efficiently and make it happen.
Yeah, you'd have to have the Senate to do that, because the Senate has to confirm the nominations. And there's also this protection called a filibuster in place that really protects against that too. But if one party controls both the presidency and the Senate, you run the risk of being able to do that. And we shouldn't care what party it is that wants to do that. You shouldn't want that. Because once that starts happening, the judicial branch becomes another part of the executive branch, because now all we're doing is putting in political appointees who are going to vote the way that they want them to vote, versus a court today that I think will, no matter what their side is, sometimes people are upset at, there are conservative justices that Republican people still get upset with about how they rule, because they want them to be more aggressive, but they're just following the laws as written. So it's the idea that if we don't have our way, we're just going to keep adding more.
That doesn't have to be a constitutional amendment to do that.
There's some ways that you could try to do it. It would require that, but there's not these clear set terms of how many justices you have to have. We've pretty much been on a 9 for a while, but there are some creative ways you can get around that a little bit if you control the Senate. So there are just some ways that could happen. We just need to know about it, because if you look about the last time, it's been tried one other time, which was under a very popular presidency, Roosevelt, and it didn't go through because it was just the people were so strongly against it that when it was pushed, they just said, we can't, we're not going to stand for this. So just knowing what that topic is, and when you hear the term court packing, if all Americans can know what that means and say, hey, regardless of what side you're on, we shouldn't be for this. That's how you get rid of something like
because it changes, it moves it from being a third part of our government to really joining the executive branch, doesn't it?
Yeah. So that's the first one. The second part that's been shifted recently because court packing is more extreme. The terms that play a little better are court reform, which generally breaks down into two issues, which is an ethics committee and term limits, which generally you hear those two and you say, okay, those don't sound bad on their face, but then you break them down and they do. So if you take term limits in themselves, you can argue either way, but term limits here, they want them to be retroactive. So what that means is the two oldest justices on the court
are immediately off,
are gone.
Yeah.
And those two just happen to be the strongest conservative justices on the court. So it's the idea that, okay, if we can't pack the court, let's just get the ones we don't like off and replace them with who we want.
Yeah.
So that's the term limits debate. And then on the ethics side, it's the idea that, well, we need to have someone inside of the court system that checks the judges, that's watching to make sure that they're not being bribed and all this. Well, there already is a Supreme Court code of ethics in place where they govern themselves. And when you have liberal and conservative justices, if someone's breaking that code of ethics, they're going to call each other out because they're not all on the same side on all these. Yeah. So they're checking themselves. And if there's anything that comes up that needs to be addressed, you can still go through impeachment proceedings. You can still have criminal things that can be brought. But if you put another executive branch or legislative branch inside the judicial branch, now what's going to start happening is you're going to start having ethics hearings come up for judges that don't vote the way that people are wanting to vote. And they're going to bring all these different ethics charges to basically try to get people in trouble when they're not voting the way they want them to vote. Yeah. So you want these branches to be independent, to be separate. And there already are checks and balances on the Supreme Court. It's not like they're free to do whatever they want.
Right.
They can, if they have a ruling that the legislative branch doesn't like, the legislative branch can write a new law.
Yeah.
If the judge steps out of line, is taking bribes, doing whatever, you can bring impeachment charges against them. You can bring criminal charges. But we don't need another body that sits inside the Supreme Court and basically tries to get people in trouble when they're not voting the way they want them to vote.
Yeah.
So that's when you hear court reform, you're hearing those two issues are the keys for those, which are both really bad.
And is there any likelihood that they can pass some kind of court reform before the election?
Not likely before the election.
Yeah.
The dangerous thing would be just watching on how the presidency goes and then the House and Senate on how those go.
Yeah.
If those are all aligned, it can be a thing, but that's not something that the Trump administration has ever really hinted even at proposing. You saw it done the right way, I think, under the Trump administration, which was as seats became available, you filled them with the right people. It's not the idea of we need to get things to a majority that we want. It's let's just put in judges who are going to follow the law and kind of let everything run as it's supposed to run. So I don't think that's a concern if Trump wins. It's a little bit different if Kamala wins, which she's been very vocal about being for those policies.
So in short, I mean, you're basically saying without endorsing is that the Trump administration and the way it was, the 4-year term that they had, were very pro-religious freedom. And now that they're running again, they're going to be more pro-religious freedom by far than a Harris ticket. Is that pretty much what you're thinking?
Yeah, if you look at the records and what they've done, I think the facts support that. We have a breakdown of that on our website too, under our elections resources.
What about Tim Walz? I mean, I've heard a lot of stuff about him.
So the big things you can see on him, it's hard. I haven't done as much research on the religious freedom component. I mean, you would assume that that's just going to fall with Kamala, but One issue that sometimes has overlap with religious freedom is parental rights. The idea sometimes can overlap where it's, well, we don't want Christian parents to be able to hold their kids out of this lesson, or we don't want Christian parents to be able to stop their child from transitioning to a different gender. And Walz passed a bill that's very anti-parental rights in Minnesota, giving kids the right to taking away parental consent from things and notifications from parents.
Basically a kid could decide to have a sex change without letting his parents know about it, right? I mean,
there's some dangerous things with that. Also some dangerous things with different things that have happened under his regime of money that's kind of disappeared in certain places, things like that don't have to do with religious freedom, but just something to point out. But the big one would be, from religious freedom component, would be what he's done with parental rights and pushing the LGBTQ issue to the front of that. He's been very vocal behind Planned Parenthood, some different groups like that. So there's nothing that shows that he's pro-religious freedom. In any way.
Plus, he's had a pretty good alliance with some of the extreme Muslim interests that are in Minnesota. Be interesting to see how, when they get in the pledge in the election, it's amazing how they can manipulate all that and change it. Yeah. And so it's going to be an interesting few months here.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And what about J.D. Vance? What do we know about him?
Know that he comes from tough background. I mean, I'm not sure if you saw the movie.
Yes, I did. My wife and I just watched it a week ago.
Yeah. So obviously there's some faith component in his background. Obviously a lot of stuff with drugs, which we have a drug issue in the country right now. So he's probably strong on that. That we know that he's a person of faith, that he's going to be he's very bought into the Trump ticket of what Trump has done and what he stands for. And so I don't think there's any question that he would fall into the freedoms that Trump would want to, again, put into place with religious freedom, and making sure that's protected. So no reason to think that he wouldn't be for everything that Trump did this last administration.
Yeah. It's a pretty amazing record just to be 39 years old. Yeah, pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think people are ready for a little bit of some younger people to come in. So I think it's nice that he's a little younger.
Yeah.
Makes it where you have someone younger that could be in.
Last thing I want to say, just get your thoughts on this topic, just get your thoughts on this is, and I think it's a mistake to look at this election as two elderly men and their worldview. I mean, really, it's bigger than that. It's more than that. It really is about two systems that are at war, and I think, to me, the only answer that we can possibly give that have a long-term effect is that people of faith need to get involved with government. It's not just the presidential campaign, it's the local government. That's where all these new leaders are going to come from.
Yeah.
And we have, particularly in Dallas, I mean, we've just sort of sat by and let that just kind of dwindle down to almost no people of faith involved at all.
Yeah.
And so, you have any advice for pastors, for church leaders to motivate their churches in that area? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look back at COVID, when COVID happened, I think that shows you the best example of both sides of what happens when you don't get involved, what happens when you do.
Oh.
So we saw a lot of local officials during COVID that were saying, okay, we need to close the churches, we need to do all this. And you would see certain places even in the state of Texas where the officials said, no, churches are essential business, they're staying open.
Yeah.
But then we saw other counties, other areas that they said, hey, we're going to close this. We're going to close the churches, they're not essential.
Yeah.
And how that's local, that's all local. Those are district judges who are voted on.
Yeah.
So those are people you can vote on.
Yeah.
And then we saw afterwards, when people realized what had happened, we passed a Supreme Court amendment, or a constitutional amendment in the state of Texas that never again moving forward will the state of Texas have the authority to tell a house of worship that they have to close for any reason. And so that now is protecting our churches for years and years to come.
Yeah.
And that's because we had someone in the state government that was pushing these things, and we had enough people on board to add that as a Texas state constitutional amendment.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are just showing you what can happen with one issue of the bad and the good, and how we can, really put ourselves behind, but how we can really promote protect ourselves in the future, our kids and grandkids, if we have people involved in every level of government.
Yeah. Well, that brings me really to the last point I want to talk to you about, really, is the F3 initiative.
Yeah.
That you are currently heading up for First Liberty, and talk to us a little bit about that and how what it is, how you're doing it, and how people can get involved.
Yeah. So F3 is it stands for Future of Faith and Freedom. It's the idea that really the future of our faith and freedom comes from those that are just building families right now. They're building their jobs, they're growing in their careers. And if those people don't know what their rights are, we're going to be giving them up. And so it's the idea that these young moms and dads, these young business people, can kind of be educated on their rights, know what their rights are, be equipped with the tools that they need to kind of be able to share those with their community, and then empower those people to really take back their communities, to take a stand, to be on the watch for things that are happening in their communities. And we've already seen situations where when people are involved, they see stuff that's happening to their friends, they'll refer that to us, and we're able to step in and say, hey, you have the right to do this, or hey, we're going to step in on your behalf here. And so if people know what their rights are and they know how they can advance those, we can at the grassroots level take back communities through young families that are just standing for truth, that are educated and trying to do that. So that's what F3 is trying to do that across the country. Every group looks different, from San Diego to Dallas to New York. We're not in Dallas, our freedoms aren't on the front lines every day necessarily, but if you're in Southern California and your kids are in elementary school, you feel like you're fighting for your kids every day.
Every day.
So if you know what your rights are there, you know how to stand up. And it's kind of the idea behind it. So if you're watching this and you're interested, you can go to firstliberty.org/F3. And that has information on getting involved, becoming an ambassador in your region, helping get the word out about kind of what we're doing and knowing really what your rights are. Yeah.
So explain that to me a little bit. So I have a young family. I'm interested in knowing what my rights are, and this is a way for me to get involved. I would go to your website. I would sign up. Then what?
Yeah. So how this movement grows is through these groups of people called ambassadors, and our ambassadors are the ones that are saying, "Hey, this is something that's very important to me. I'm going to be a leader in my community for this. So I'm going to help bring people in. I'm going to get involved. I'm going to donate in some way that I can, because we're a 501c3 nonprofit." And as we do that, as people go all in, then those people will get their friends together and say, "Hey, I've got a group together that I want to hear about the story," and we'll come in and talk with them and educate them. And then we have calls for our ambassadors, so they get to hear about our cases in exclusive ways, that things that we're doing, so they're educated on the types of cases that we have. And then we do exclusive events for this group to get like-minded people together, to hear more about what's going on, to hear more about their rights, and then to make a difference by coming together as a community to sponsor certain cases, so that people can feel like they're really making a difference and matters.
I love that. Yeah, love it. And you're getting quite a bit of traction already, right?
Yeah. We're from coast to coast right now, from New York all the way to California, and we've got ambassadors in Dallas and in Miami, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, Birmingham, Alabama, all over the place. So.
Well, I mean, it's great, because a practitioner, a pastor like me can say, "Look, we've got this going on. If you want to get involved, want to know more about the issues, want to know more about the processes, hey, we got this right here in the church for you to get involved in."
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Nathan, hey, man, I really appreciate you being with us. And we really love what First Liberty is doing. This is an exciting project with the F3 initiative, and to see you get lots of traction really quick is great.
Yeah,
Thank you for spending time with us today and being with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you.
Why don't you remind everybody your website and how to get in touch with you, and if they're interested in F3, if they're interested more about religious liberty, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not, firstliberty.org is the best way to get plugged in. And then if you're in that 20s to 40s range, you have young kids, or you could have young kids that age, it's firstliberty.org/F3. Mm-hmm. And then on that page, you'll see a bunch of different ways to get involved. And if you want to be an ambassador, you can hit that ambassador program tab and fill out a form, and that goes directly to me, and I'll get in touch with you about next steps and getting involved and what we can do in your community.
Fantastic. We'll be watching that, and I think we're already participating.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that, and I'm excited about having you here today and all that you guys have your hands to.
Yes.
For those of you that joined us today via this podcast, thank you for joining us. Be sure to hit like if you would, and subscribe. We have every Tuesday morning something coming out that I think you will be encouraged about and that you will be equipped over. So, hey, thanks for being with us again, and Nathan, and God bless you and First Liberty and all you guys are doing.
Thank you.